I'd like to welcome you all to the House Center for an interactive gun forum that is being presented by the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. I'm Dolores Lupke. I'm from West Pollitt, and I'm the organizer. I will be very brief. I'm just going to give you the protocols and let you know this is being filmed for PEG TV. It will be released sometime next week and will be on the air for 2 weeks. It is also being live streamed by the Vermont Good Neighbor Project. We want to say thank you to both and to remind you that when you speak, although you will have a microphone, just keep in mind that everybody wants to hear you. The fact this is interactive means that not only are you going to learn from the panel will learn from you. I want to thank the House Center for giving us the opportunity to have this room. When you have an opportunity to speak, questions, opinions are welcome. We're all here to learn. I have asked Dave Zito, who is one of my friends from the Friends of NRA, to lead us in the flag salute. Would everyone please stand?
Thank you, and just going in, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, and now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Terry Williams, who is the Southern Vermont Vice President of the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. He will let you know what's going on, and then he will introduce the panel and our moderator. Thank you all for coming, and let's hope that a lot of the laws are explained very well so that we know just what is coming forth from the legislature. Thank you.
Thanks, Dolores. I'm just going to give you a little background for those that don't know what the Federation stands for. It was established in 1875 by a bunch of sportsmen. It's instrumental in the establishment of the Vermont Fishing Game Department, which was called something else back then. It helped to reintroduce the white-tailed deer to Vermont around 1900 because they were all gone because there was no habitat for them. We're a Vermont sponsor organization for the NRA, 50 member clubs, and thousands of members, thanks to the member clubs. We send kids to conservation camp. We conserve and preserve wildlife and habitat for future generations, and we fight for your hunting, fishing, and shooting rights. Chris Bradley, the president, couldn't be here tonight because he's ill, but I'm going to start off with some presentations. Evan Hughes, on the right, is the vice president of the Federation. He's a registered lobbyist in Montpelier. I grew up with Evan in Pulteney. He's a good guy, he's a real patriot, and he knows Vermont gun laws. Darren Goins is the NRA ILA, which is the Institute for Legislative Action liaison, and is with the Federation, and he's responsible for 4 Northeast states, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, and Rhode Island, and he said that until now, Vermont was one of the easiest ones he had to deal with. Sam Frank is a retired Orange County sheriff who joined other law enforcement agencies across the country to fight the Brady Bill, which required every agency to enforce their federal law. Mark W. Smith is a constitutional lawyer and the New York Times best-selling author, and his most recent book, Duped: How the Anti-Gun Lobby Exploits the Parkland School Shooting and How Gun Owners Can Fight Back. So he kept the best to the last, and he's gonna discuss his philosophy on that. I'm going to cover some of the legislative bills that are out there right now, and I'm only going to do 7 or 8 of them because that are going to have the most impact on the sportsmen and the hunter and the shooters. You can go to www.vtfsc.org or .com, which is our Federation website, and you can click on legislation, and it'll have an up-to-date series of the listed legislation. House 30, confiscation of firearms for restraining order. House 159, requirement for a 72-hour waiting period for all firearm transfers. Remember, there's a mandatory, you have to get a background check before you can do private sales now. House 203, prosecution if your firearms are misused. And I've got in parentheses, negligent storage. Senate 22, 2-day waiting period and mandatory firearms lockup. That's if you buy a gun, the proposal is that you're going to have to wait 2 days before you can take possession of that firearm. House 99 and Senate 29, an act relating to the trade in covered animal parts or products. That's the, I think ivory ban will probably come to mind with that. Senate 72, an act relating to extreme protection orders. And that's where they can actually go in and confiscate any weapons that they see if there's a protection order or domestic violence. House 241 and Senate 106, allowing for municipal self-governance. And I think that has to do with the Dillon rule versus local rule. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator, Mark Camden. Mark's a former representative to the Vermont State House, a good friend of freedom, and I appreciate you doing this, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry. Are they going to use that microphone, holding it, to speak to the crowd?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Camden. I'm from Rutland City. I'm a native of Proctor, former member of the Vermont House many, many moons ago. I thought I would break up the evening, if we got to keep it going. The speakers will speak 5 or 6 minutes. We may give Mark Smith a little bit of extra time. I just want to start by using some one-sentence quotes, and I'll start with one of my favorites. I support a woman's right to choose any gun she wants. So Evan, take it away. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me? Now can you hear me? Okay. Legislation in the State House. As Terry said, I'm a registered lobbyist, as is Darren. There are about 500 registered lobbyists in the state of Vermont. There's 150 members of the House and 30 members of the Senate, and 500 of us registered lobbyists all running all over that State House. Legislation. Thus far, as of this morning, your legislature has introduced 464 bills, 349 in the House, 115 in the Senate, and a gun control bill came out this morning. 49 bills came out this morning. In the last biennium, 2017-2018, your legislature introduced 1,280 bills, I believe. So they're busy people up there. And a lot of folks out here, you're running your lives, you're doing what you do, and they don't pay much attention to that legislature. Well, there was an ancient philosopher named Pericles, and he said, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. And the way that's put in the Vermont legislature is, if you're not at the table, you're on the table, which means you're the meal. You're what's getting devoured. So that's why the Federation for so long has taken such an interest in legislation in the State House. And we have a very basic philosophy. We believe law should be based on sound public policy in conjunction with the state and federal constitutions. Very easy to understand, very reasonable. And that's what gets us in so many different discussions with the legislature. Terry mentioned some of the bills, and he mentioned H-241 and S-106, and he talked about municipal control. In 1988, the Vermont legislature passed what's called the Sportsman's Bill of Rights. To somebody like Darren or Mark, it's a preemption law. It tells the municipalities they can't get involved in certain things. Firearms carry, hunting, trapping, reloading, ammunition, and that the legislature says to the municipalities, this is our purview. You have no business in here. And that's based on the philosophy of Dillon's rule, that the state is the ultimate authority in what goes on in the state. It's the United States of America, not the United Municipalities of America. Though there are some in the city halls and town halls that think that ought to be different. We have bills up there we watch closely. One that just came out today is H-329, which is a firearm storage bill. Some of these bills will say you have to have that firearm under your constant control, or you can't have it unlocked or not in the safe. In other words, you got to take it in the shower with you when you go in. Anybody ever heard of gun on a rope? I doubt very much you would have ever heard of that. But there you go, a new product that was just born. Your rights should be important to you, and for anybody who served in the military, they're very important because those folks have put their skin into the game. And one thing we always try and get people to do is vote. Always try and encourage people to vote. And people will say, I'm too busy, I don't have time. Well, there are folks who are in Afghanistan and Iraq who served over there who are voting from over there. And they're already putting their life on the line to protect our freedoms and our liberty. And it would be nice if we do the same to try and protect their rights for them when they come back. One of the things the Federation does, besides get involved in the development of legislation, is we litigate. We're the NRA State Association for Vermont. The NRA has one state association for each state. And in the recent past, we've joined with all the other NRA state associations around the country and filed an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, before the United States Supreme Court in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, in which the gun side won. And in 2010, we filed another amicus brief in City of Chicago versus McDonald, and the gun side won again. Just recently, we entered into an amicus brief joining with 7 or 8 other gun organizations in a petition seeking certiorari, asking for the case to be heard for the New Jersey state organization before the United States Supreme Court. So we've been doing this a long time. In 2018, the infamous S-55 was passed into law. I think most of you are aware of that. It's now Act 94, and I was standing in front of the State House watching the governor sign that bill. And that was on April 11th. On April 18th, we sued the state of Vermont in Washington County Superior Court, and our law firm is Cooper and Kirk, a Washington, D.C. law firm. Our on-the-ground in Vermont lawyer is Brady Townsend. We had a hearing, the first hearing, on that lawsuit in the Washington County Superior Court on Tuesday, the 12th. And that's just the start of this lawsuit. It will go on for a while. Whoever loses in the Superior Court will appeal to the Vermont Supreme Court. But litigate this we will, because we think there's a responsibility to challenge that firearms magazine ban, because we don't see, by our standard, that it's sound public policy, and we question whether it's in compliance with the state and federal constitutions. As Terry said, the Federation is composed of 50 member clubs around the state. we enjoy the support of the clubs. There's clubs from the Rutland County area, south of there, east of there, and up north. I'm a trustee of the Berry Fishing Game Club. And representing you is an honor and a privilege for us, and we want to continue to do it. And this type of forum where we come out and discuss what's happening is how we're going to get that done. So I will now pass it along to Darren.
Thank you, Evan. Darren Goins is a government relations professional with over 20 years of experience. He's NRA State Director and currently lobbies in Vermont, New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. He's lobbied in 9 different states, and he is an avid hunter and an NRA certified basic pistol instructor. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. That's James Madison. Take it away, Darren.
All right, thank you very much. Everybody hear me all right? First of all, I want to thank Terry and Dolores for doing all the hard work and putting this together, and I wanted to thank all of you guys for filling the room and producing a good turnout. It's good to see the enthusiasm and the concern that people that come out, and Evan has really hit some good points about participation and getting people out. Clearly, the people that are going to come to an event like this are going to be the ones that vote, so it's largely preaching to the choir. So your job, should you choose to accept it, is to go out and get other people to vote and make a difference. So I'm going to follow the outline that Dolores had. There were a few things that she wanted me to talk about. And the first one was the NRA role in proposed gun laws. Well, I guess let me not get ahead of myself. I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about my experience to help you understand sort of my perspective on things and how that plays out here. I grew up in South Dakota, very rural state, a lot like Vermont. In fact, we have one of the highest hunter participation and firearm ownership in the entire country. You can't go through a town, small towns out there in October without seeing big orange banners on the convenience stores, the restaurants, welcome hunters. The economy there is based on hunting. I grew up with firearms. I now live in the People's Republic of New Jersey, which is very different. If my kid draws a gun on his notebook, he gets expelled. So I don't think you could find a more diverse background in terms of seeing both ends of the spectrum. In fact, one time I saw on Yahoo they had ranked the 1 through 50 from the most free to the least free. And South Dakota was ranked the most free. And you guessed it, New Jersey was ranked the least free. So I've lived in number 1 and number 50 and seen a lot in between. And as I said, I've lobbied in 9 states. I've done North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Michigan, and Colorado. Those were my first 5 states. I was a legislative staffer in Colorado, straight out of graduate school. And as you guys can see on the national news, what's happened in Colorado, that's now a purple state. Well, it's a purple state. Now it's a blue state. When I started out, it was a red state. And, you know, it's a good example, and I think it's helpful for me, and it's instructive for Vermont, because a lot of the same things that happen there that flip that state to blue are starting to happen here, and one might argue they've already happened, and that's a massive demographic change. You know, a couple of the panelists up here were talking about when you go through the legislative directory and you see people's biographies, very few of them are Vermonters, native Vermonters. They're from somewhere else, and they brought their politics with them, and now we're suffering the consequences. And it's not unique to here. New York, New Jersey, there's a massive out-migration. New York State has lost 1 million people under Andrew Cuomo that have left the state, and they've packed up and they've moved to North Carolina primarily, South Carolina and Tennessee. And now you're starting to see the impact in North Carolina as that state is trending more into the purple category. You know, it's one thing when they ruin a state. You know, they drive we just saw it in Long Island, right? They chased away 25,000 to 40,000 jobs, and they're destroying the economy. These states all operate in the red, and then when they do that, they pack up like Governor Chafee in Rhode Island, and they move to Wyoming. And you can guess what's going to happen in Wyoming, and that's one of the challenges we have. So that was probably a little bit more detail than I wanted to go into on that. But the role of the NRA, I'm going to break it down pretty simply. We participate in elections, legislation, and then litigation, and usually in that order. In terms of elections, we obviously rate every candidate in the legislature based on their voting record, their answers to the candidate questionnaire. Now we're even doing social media searches to vet candidates to let you guys know who to vote for, because arming you with knowledge on who's good on the issue and who's not so good on the issue is what's going to help persuade your vote and let you know if you truly want to preserve the Second Amendment, who's going to have your back and who's not. So we spend a lot of time and effort on elections. Evan can attest. After we get candidate lists, we go through massive stacks of paper voting, and it's been busy lately. When I first started, we had very few gun votes. Now we have votes on the floor, in committee, we have sponsors, we have co-sponsors. There's a lot of stuff to go through now in addition to the candidate questionnaires. And keep in mind, NRA does this throughout the country in every single state, from state legislative races all the way to the White House. In terms of legislation, I think Evan hit on it a little bit, and this kind of ties into one of the other things that she wanted me to talk about, and that was the interaction that we have with the Federation. The Federation, they're our state association. Evan and I, especially when the legislature's in session, we talk and we communicate weekly for sure, and sometimes daily, if not every other day. I mean, we're sending emails. Evan does a tremendous job up there. In fact, I pity you guys for the day that he hangs his hat up and retires and moves on, because in all those states that I've done, I got to tell you, this guy sitting next to me is more versed in legislation, the bills, the issues, the people up there than a lot of the activists in my other states, and I've had a lot of states. And you got to keep in mind, he does that on a volunteer basis. So tremendous effort, and right now I'd ask that you give him a round of applause, because there's nobody more deserving. And Evan, by the way, makes my job a lot easier when we have resources like that on the ground, because I have to be put, I'm like I always say I'm like the fire department, and I go where the fires are at. If the bills are up there in New York, I go to New York. In fact, prior to coming here, I spent 2 weeks over there getting my head pounded in. So, and then I come up here and deal with things here. And then I'll go to New Jersey and do the same thing there. And then the final component is litigation, and Evan hit on some of that. There's two big cases up right now that NRA is at. And keep in mind, you get a lot of NRA bashing online from some people that aren't happy in some states. What you got to remember is we have litigation going in California, Maryland, New Jersey, New York. Who do you think foots the bill for that? You know, that stuff doesn't always get discussed, but without the NRA, and, you know, I may be biased, but I can tell you we'd be a whole lot further back. And, you know, and if the other side wasn't, I mean, they're going to come out and tell you, I mean, they attack us. If we were harmless, they wouldn't attack us, right? They know that we're the only thing standing between melting the guns and not melting the guns. And make no mistake, that's where they want to go. It was interesting years ago even when I first started this 13 years ago, they would run from it. We're not going to take your guns. Remember, you hear that all the time, right? We're not going to take your guns. Well, that's changed. I mean, that has completely changed. Now they're not bashful about it at all. In fact, after Parkland, I think it was very instructive at the town hall meeting when they were describing what exactly they'd like to ban, and they just lumped that all in as AR assault weapon bans. And Marco Rubio said, "Oh, time out. What you're describing here isn't an AR. It's a semi-auto firearm. It's a hunting rifle. It's a .22 plinker. It's describing the action of a gun. It's not AR-15s. You're banning. It's semi-autos. Is that what you're willing to ban?" And they just nodded and shrugged their shoulders. So I think that tells you where things are going. But the two big cases in terms of litigation right now are Rogers versus Gruol, which deals with carry, and the fact that New Jersey basically issues no permits. They have about 9 million people that live there, and there's something like 1,300 permits. I mean, you basically, their justifiable need standard is so strict that no, you would have to be, I'd have to be punching Evan for him to say he's got justifiable need. So it's very draconian, and we're hoping to overturn that. The people in New Jersey are very beleaguered. You think that people around here are depressed about the gun laws? You should go to New York and New Jersey. And it's also instructive because it shows you that they're not going to stop. In fact, it's interesting when you flip this over, and it's got a list of the gun bills here. Last year, when we were doing S55, they had the answers: how to stop school shootings, how to stop gun violence, and they ran those bills through, and then they passed them. But the funny thing is, we come back the next January, they got a list of more bills to do. To me, there's no bigger indictment that those bills that they passed last year are failures by the fact that they came back with this. I mean, imagine a contractor on your house that comes and fixes the plumbing, the electric, and says, I'm done, then shows up the next year and says, well, I got all this to do, and then the next year, and I've got this to do. You'd start to doubt that that contractor was actually fixing things, right? Well, that's what we're faced with these gun bills, and that's why it's frustrating. And that sort of segues into, on the agenda, wanting me to talk about the New York SAFE Act. Now, you don't live in New York, you're close to New York, but how does that really impact you? Well, I think it's instructive to see some of these states and how far they've gone. In 2013, they passed the SAFE Act over there. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. It contained a semi-auto ban, a mag ban, which incidentally was overturned. They went to 7 rounds. New Jersey just last year went from 15 to 10, and there's a bill introduced this year to go to 5. I'm not sure there are even 5-round magazines that exist. But it just shows you that the appetite for gun control is never ending, and the end goal is just to get rid of them. I mean, that's what they want to do. And again, we go through the SAFE Act 6 years ago, not more than 6 weeks after the Democrats take control of the Senate there and have unified control of the legislature and the executive office. They come back, they waited 6 years, they get control of it, they wait 6 years, it takes them 6 weeks to roll out a whole new package. And that package included a bump stock ban, red flag bills. What else they have? They prohibited teacher carry, and they did a bunch of other worthless stuff like gun buybacks. And there are more bills in the hopper, believe it or not. They want to ban 50 caliber rifles. They want to do social media searches before you're allowed to buy a gun. So that would be like if you go to Walmart or Dick's or your local gun shop, they said, oh, okay, fill out your federal paperwork. Now we got some investigator that's going to look through your social media history. By the way, you got to turn over your passwords to all that. And the state's going to pay for these investigators. I mean, it's crazy, right? Not to mention that, but that sort of has a chilling effect on your First Amendment right. And what exactly stops you from getting the gun? What happens if you like the wrong sort of post? Well, this guy liked too many Trump posts. I guess he can't have a gun. I mean, we're starting to get into free speech police. And then there's another. I'm sorry,
Okay, here we go. We just want to keep it moving. We got a great panel, don't you agree? It's a fantastic panel.
Get a little long.
And you're going to be able to ask them any questions. You just want to save the questions for the end of the night. A system of licensing and registration is the perfect device to deny gun ownership to the bourgeoisie. Vladimir Lenin. So we have another native on our panel, Evans from Poultney. Sam Frank is an old friend of mine. I've seen him once or twice since 1964. He's a native of Proctor. He's a famous sheriff of Orange County. 28 years in law enforcement. And take it away, Sam.
Thank you. January 1st, 1994, I met with law enforcement officers in Norwich University to talk about implementing the Brady Law, and that was a meeting with the U.S. government. At that point, the sheriffs volunteered to do the background checks. I volunteered to do that. I was elected by the people of Orange County. I felt that it was my duty at the time to do so. When we got into that mode, the Brady Law mandated that we did the checks and not get paid. I was elected again by the state of Vermont, residents of Orange County. I do not have federal powers, nor can the federal government tell me to enforce federal laws. Also, that Brady Law said that if somebody wanted to sue me for denying their right to have a firearm from the check that I would do through the federal and state crime centers, that they could sue me, but not the federal government. So that didn't set well. So for a birthday gift on May 10th, 1994, I entered a lawsuit against the United States government. August 2nd, 1994, we had a hearing at the Burlington Courthouse, federal courthouse, and Judge Parker ruled in our favor, my favor. And later on, I can't remember the date, but we went to the Second Appellate Court in New York City, and that wasn't so much fun. We lost that one. Regardless, the other sheriffs, there was 6 other sheriffs that were in the suit. I was the only one east of the Mississippi. The rest were over on the other side, and there was various decisions which made it go to the Supreme Court. And in June of '97, and the Supreme Court ruled in our favor and partially told us that we didn't have to do that. We're not mandated to do the federal checks, and they couldn't hold us responsible for it. So that, in that time when I was doing the suit, this is a roller coaster ride, I can tell you. And it cost a lot of money. So we had people out here, and some of you might have given money towards this, which, thank God, that the NRA asked if they could help, and they did. Otherwise, I could have never afforded to do this. So be thankful for the NRA. They're not the enemy. They're your friends. I also got asked many times about gun laws and gun rights and why I thought that everybody should have a gun, etc. And about, you know, we hear gun sense today, which makes no sense to me, but you know, they did the magazine thing, for example, the less capacity magazines, like that's going to stop everybody or anybody. How long has murder been on the books? Somewhere in the Bible, I think, somewhere it started. How's that working? So, you know, and the kids being shot in the schools and stuff like that. I told him, I says, look, this was back in the 90s. I'm talking to the news media. They'll never let the facts interfere with getting a story, by the way. It's our society. We need to clean up our society. It's worse now. Look at the drugs and everything else that's going on. We can't hold anybody responsible. We give kids prizes for everything. I mean, it's We got a problem with our society. That's how you're gonna stop this sort of action. Not by taking your guns away from you or giving you less capacity magazines. It's not gonna happen. The other thing is interesting is 700 people a day die because of medical malpractice. That figure comes from a peer review study done in 2016 by Johns Hopkins University. You see anything in the news media about that? That's 700 people a day. Do the math. So, we need to all stick together. You need, as these people have said on my right, and you're gonna hear it from Mark Smith, we need to get you out there to vote. You need to talk to your neighbors, give them a ride to the booth, voting booth. You need to keep an eye on these people up there under the gold dome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam.
Mark?
Yeah.
Mark Smith is the New York Times best-selling author. He's a presidential scholar and senior fellow in law and public policy at the King's College in New York City, a former professor of law. He is a practicing trial attorney who was admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court bar and serves as the vice president of the New York City chapter of the Federalist Society. A graduate of NYU School of Law, he regularly appears in the national media as a political and legal commentator. I was honored to serve with him on the trustee board at his alma mater, the Vermont Academy in Saxons River, Vermont. He is a native of Bellows Falls. Mark Smith lives in New York City with his 12-pound gun dog, Hugo. And before I turn it over to him, I just want to say, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's from James Madison. It's in the U.S. Constitution. Mark?
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for having me here in the state of Vermont, where I'm originally from. It's always nice to leave New York City and visit the United States. Do we have any New England Patriot fans here in the room? Anybody like Tom Brady? I'm a huge fan of the Patriots and Tom Brady. Been to lots of games and big supporter of the team and all that. And, this interesting, I actually think there's a lesson for us in this room in the Second Amendment movement in the United States. And Tom Brady and the Patriots this year, I think, can convey this to us, and we can learn from them and their successes. At the end of the season, Tom Brady and the Patriots, all these sports commentators said, oh, they're terrible. They're not the same team. They're going to lose. They got no hope. Kansas City's going to beat them. You all read all that. Well, Tom Brady and the Patriots had a simple approach, which was this: still here. We're still here. So that's really going to be the point of my conversation tonight. So when you read these newspapers and you hear this propaganda from the anti-gun left and the anti-gun billionaires and the people that say they don't want to take away your guns, which is a lie, they do, just remember, when you feel depressed and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we're in trouble, just remember what Tom Brady taught us. We're still here. And that's very important to understand, because we really are. You see, if you go around the country, as I do, because one of the credentials that wasn't mentioned, and I may as well mention it because I think it's a friendly crowd. In 2016, I was a media surrogate for an organization you may have heard of. It was called the Donald J. Trump Presidential Campaign. And during my work on that, when I did a lot of talk radio in the various swing states, the Michigans, the parts of Maine and Pennsylvania on the list, when you would talk to people in these areas of the country, they liked Donald Trump because he spoke like an ordinary person, right? He told it the way he did it. Whether you agree with him or not, you at least believe that what he said, he meant. And, obviously, I really think Donald Trump is the best Second Amendment president we've had in, 100 plus years, if not the whole country, right? He's been great. and the Supreme Court in particular, and this is a critical fact that's changed. With the retirement of Justice Kennedy and the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh, I think the U.S. Supreme Court has now gone and become a friendly court for the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. And this is very, very important, more so than maybe initially be obvious. And that's because so many of these blue state anti-gun legislators pass gun laws because they think they can get away with it. After the Heller and McDonald decision 8 years ago or so, you saw a decrease in the amount of legislation involving gun control laws because basically a lot of legislators said, we're going to lose. It's not worth spending the time on this because the courts are going to strike it down. But in the last many years, the Supreme Court really did not touch on the Second Amendment. And as a consequence, the anti-gun legislators from America got emboldened and started passing these laws. And I think that with the replacement of Kennedy with Brett Kavanaugh, you're going to see, starting with this New York City law, which is up right now, struck down. I think then you'll see other laws struck down, like the right to carry. And then down the road, I think any so-called assault weapon bans will get struck down as well. But that's going to take a few terms. So we really are doing well in the following sense. We have a very favorable Supreme Court, which we didn't have. The second thing is that ordinary Americans believe that the Second Amendment means what it says, which is the right to bear arms belongs to us, the people. The rhetoric and the propaganda that comes out of the urban areas like New York and San Francisco remain very popular among the urban elite. But ordinary Americans still believe that we have the right to own guns, and the right to own guns is important. In fact, again, you look at the media, they don't tell you any of the good news, which is that we now have 14 states. 14 states in the United States allow you to conceal carry without a permit, right? Now, we Vermonters have known this for our entire lives, right? But this trend continues to grow, and this constitutional carry trend continues to grow. We're now up to 14 states, with South Dakota just being the newest member of the club, and that's growing. And by the way, you know, the may issue versus shall issue is that the police essentially have to let you carry unless you're a criminal. May issue basically means that, you know, chiefs of police who don't like guns get to determine whether or not you're good enough to have a gun. Right now, we have 43 states that have shall issue, which is a great, powerful support. It just shows that the number of states, I like to call them the disarmament states, are actually few and far and the distinct minority in the United States. There are, in fact, only 8 states now that have some sort of, magazine or sort of semi-automatic rifle bans and all that. The other 42 states, you can buy ARs and own them, and that's a great constituency for us. I want to mention one thing about the NRA, and then I'm going to talk about some of the negative trends real quick. I have a couple more minutes here. You know, I've done a lot of work on a lot of different issues. It's not just, guns is my number one issue. Let me be very, very clear about that. That's the one issue I vote on. But, I support less government, lower taxes, cultural conservative. I'm across the board conservative. There's no debate about that. And what I've noticed when I talk to my friends in the abortion debates, the pro-life debates, or the Western civilization debates, or the tax debates, or some of these other, conservative issues that get addressed, here's what I've noticed, that in all these other issues, the liberal progressive side has generally, over time, been prevailing, right? There was a big fight over gay marriage. We now have gay marriage in the United States. There's a big fight about abortion. Abortion remains legal in all 50 states. And there's a whole list of these other things, including the propaganda mills that is the high schools in America and the colleges in America. So the question is, why is it that of all the list of conservative values and policy positions, why is it that the one area where our team has not just not lost, but actually advanced the ball and won is guns? And that's because these other issues do not have an NRA. They do not have an NRA. And that makes all the difference. So the reason why you see these media outlets and the money being spent by the billionaires to target the NRA with anonymous sources, that people inside the NRA don't like the NRA, and they don't sell coffee. They got the whole list, right? There's always another anti-NRA story. It is not a coincidence. The liberals in America, the left-wing people in America, understand that not just on the gun issue, but on all issues about traditional American life, they have to take out the NRA specifically. It's not the National Shooting Sports Foundation. It's not gun owners. It's not the Vermont Federation. It's none of this. It's the NRA, because the NRA actually changes election outcomes. And that's why you've seen billions of dollars, essentially, millions of dollars being spent by billionaires to take out the NRA specifically. So when you see these stories about the NRA, understand this is a propaganda effort brought around by liberals to do just that. It's why they mention the NRA by name and they call them murderers and all this stuff. It's a strategy. And I have about one more minute here.
Take your time, you're on a roll.
Amen.
Look, I am going to name a couple names here. So Michael Bloomberg. Now, Michael Bloomberg, by the way, as a New York City person, was about as good of a mayor as you could get other than Rudy Giuliani. So in New York City, the best you could hope for was a Michael Bloomberg, because the alternatives were people like Bill de Blasio and AOC and these others, right? Now, with that said, Michael Bloomberg is obviously no one we want with power in America if you're a gun owner. But there's three things that Bloomberg brings to the table that you all need to understand, because the whole point of intelligence in warfare and politics is to understand who your enemy is so you can find ways to beat them, right? So you got to understand that who Michael Bloomberg is and what he means to the gun movement in the United States. So Bloomberg is probably worth, depending on how you measure the value of his company, he's probably worth about $50 billion. That's billion with a B. He's already committed publicly to spending $500 million on the 2020 election, whether or not he runs for the White House or not. He said he's committing the money. Okay, that's now. Last I checked, and Darren can probably confirm this, I think the NRA budget is like $480 million or something. So Bloomberg is essentially committing to spend alone the same amount of money as the entire NRA budget. For everything they do, conservation, lobbying, litigation, the museum, all that stuff. Bloomberg's going to do the whole budget and then some. That's just Bloomberg. The second thing, though, that people got to understand about Michael Bloomberg is that it's not just his money that's important. It's who he is and what he does. He owns Bloomberg Media, right? He made his money with Bloomberg Media, with Bloomberg Terminals. He owns a major media company, and that media company, of course, not needless to say, I think we can probably honestly say, if you look at the editorials of the Bloomberg Media, they're really not pro-gun, right? So he has this big megaphone that also he can use against us across the country. And last but not least, he's a New Yorker. Now, look, yes, I'm New York and all that stuff, and I got all these New York connections and all this stuff. But the truth is, at the end of the day, I'm really an American, and I, am much more comfortable and support the values of ordinary Americans than the urban elite that hang out at Midtown, where I spend a lot of my time. But the truth is this. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the broadcast networks in the Midtown Manhattan, the NBCs, the CBS, the ABCs, the MSNBCs, the CNNs, they really do matter for setting the cultural trends of America. And Bloomberg and his friends, the people that he has lunch with and dinner with and goes to parties with, he has the ability to sway them as to what they write about, how they select stories. And as a consequence of this, and this is why I just want you to understand that what you read in the papers is, don't get too depressed because it's not necessarily accurate or true, right? It's, I'm not going to make a comment or joke about Jesse Smollett being a writer now, right, after today, but you get the idea. And I think the thing, though, about the press and the media is this, that they have a particular agenda. Now, I'm going to tell you briefly about owning a gun in New York City and touching a gun in New York City. Now, in New York City right now, if you have a full-blown concealed carry permit and you have a handgun and you go to a gun range and you come up to me and I want to just hand you my gun so you can look at it, and you take that gun, you're a felon and go to jail mandatorily for a year. I'm a felon and have to go to jail for 1 year under New York City law, criminally. So this is not insignificant for the media, because to the extent you want to have someone in the media understand what it means to have a gun, hold a gun, what a gun does, what it doesn't do. You are not legally able to take a member of the New York Times editorial page, bring them to a local gun range, and show them what a gun is, because if you do, you're both felons. And they're never going to get a gun permit to touch a gun, because why would they? Right? Any more than I don't get a fox hunting permit because I've never been fox hunting, never thought about fox hunting in the UK. So anyway, these urban areas are very dangerous, but that's not America, and never lose sight of that. So I'm going to leave you with one more point, and then I'll sit down, and thank you, Mark, for giving me another minute here. So what can you do about it? Well, I'm not going to get into the vote, call your congressman, all that. That's for Darren and Evan to talk to you about that stuff. Here's my only encouragement to all of you. We need you all to be brand ambassadors for guns in America. What I mean by that is you don't have to go on Fox News and CNN, and you don't have to give speeches to help us out, to help out our cause. All of your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, your daughters and your sons and their friends from high school, whatever it is, you need to encourage them to learn about guns. You need to take them to a gun range, and you want to tell them that guns are important to you and to your lives and to their lives. And when they ask you, why are guns important to me, I have a simple question that I want you to ask them. And the question is this. Ask them, what is your plan if evil comes into your door today? At your work, at your home, or breaks in? What exactly is your plan to protect yourself and your family and your colleagues if Nick Cruz from Parkland walks in with a knife, a car, a gun, whatever? What's your plan? Call 911? Well, obviously, we know that doesn't work so well, because remember, at the end of the day, the police are not the first responders. You're the first responder. It is you who calls the police and the paramedics. You're the one that has to deal with the evil first, and the police come second. So I'll leave you with this comment. It seems to me that in terms of the guns we're allowed to own, we should at least have the same amount of firepower and weaponry as the police, because we deal with the evil first, they come second. So therefore, shouldn't we have access to the same weaponry, guns, and ammo that the cops do when they show up to confront evil after we do? Thank you.
We're going to have plenty of time for questions, so start thinking of questions for the panel. And I want to start actually with Evan and Darren. Mark made a really good point. Do you see the Supreme Court as maybe a backstop going forward for voiding some of this legislation? Does the NRA have a roadmap for sustaining these freedoms? And what do you two guys need from us?
Wait, pass the mic to me conveniently. Listen, I think that when Heller and McDonald decisions came down, I think that everybody said, oh, that's settled, right? And as Mark was saying, in the liberal states, the far left state, the anti-gun states, they didn't treat it that way. The majority leader in New Jersey, like she said, when we would get up and we would argue in committee that this bill was unconstitutional, she'd say, well, it's constitutional until somebody says it isn't, right? And so that's exactly what happened, is they continued this parade of just passing bills, magazine ban. Heller stopped nothing. I mean, they didn't all of a sudden go, oh, there's a Heller decision. I mean, look how many of these magazine bans, Colorado. I mean, I can name a whole bunch of states that passed them after Heller. So they're essentially forcing the court's hand. So where do I see things? Well, I mean, one of the pivotal moments in U.S. history was the election of Donald Trump. And I mean, I don't care how you feel about his Twitter account or his tweeting or the way he runs the show, but the one thing that did matter was the 2 Supreme Court appointments that he made. I mean, that alone right there. Incidentally, we recognize that. NRA did. If you go back, it's hard to go back and really remember what it was like when he was riding down the escalator and announcing that he was running for president, and everybody was sort of laughing at him. But the one thing that did happen, NRA recognized that of all those candidates up there, We had to, once he became the nominee, we had to be all in because the alternative was Hillary Clinton and the U.S. Supreme Court was at stake. And this was make or break. So to answer your question, yes, I do think that all the cards are in on the court. We think the two justices that have been appointed are outstanding. That is evident in some of their lower court decisions, especially on firearms. And I think that the signaling is probably the fact that they've granted cert on this New York City case. That's a crazy, crazy law that doesn't allow you to take your gun outside of the city. And I really don't see the court saying, oh, we're going to certify that case to uphold that law. I just don't see that being the outcome. That, of course, is my opinion.
As I said before, Heller was in 2008, McDonald was in 2010. And what we've seen in this country, and I'm not a lawyer, Mark is that the lower courts have kind of said to the Supreme Court, well, you guys got it wrong. And we're going to find the way we think it should be until you guys get it right. And what's happened along those lines since that time is that the United States Supreme Court has not granted certiorari to any cases challenging what legislation has been enacted or cases have been decided based upon the Heller standard of what's in common usage. That was the standard that Justice Scalia used in Heller, whether something was reasonable or unreasonable. And now with these two appointments, the court now is in a position to grant certiorari and hear cases that will further extend the Supreme Court's application in Heller to those lower courts with the proviso, we were serious in Heller and McDonald. And here's a third decision telling you that we believe that the Second Amendment upholds an individual right to keep and bear arms. And that is where we are now with the New York City case, and there's the application for certiorari for the case in New Jersey. And forgive my Latin, Mark, I don't have excellent pronunciation. So that the court will take up these cases where they enhance further in their application Heller versus McDonald, like Heller and McDonald.
Okay, we're going to open this up for questions. I'll march them around.
This question's for Mark. I'm Ron Bushy from Wallingford, just down the road. Taking in the big picture, I think there's a good possibility of Ruth Bader Ginsburg may be checking out pretty soon. Not sure how officially to put that. Do you, in your influence, do you have an idea who may be a good person for Trump to nominate to fill that position? And if it happens this year, before the end of December, given the fact that all the Democrats are going so far left and tripping over themselves, you think that news cycle may garner a lot of attention and Trump may have a little easier time this time around getting his nominee through?
First of all, is this working?
Yes.
All right, first of all, I think this 2018 midterm election was a lot better, and I'm not just, by the way, this is not about just, making stuff up to make you feel good, because we have a lot to fight about. But the truth is, the 2018 midterm election was very good for Second Amendment supporters, because if you look at the composition of the United States Senate today versus back when we were fighting about Brett Kavanaugh, which was a bloody fight, as you know. I don't think you have that fight over Brett Kavanaugh today, that the people that are now in the majority in the U.S. Senate are more pro-Second Amendment. So you do have more wacky anti-gunners on Capitol Hill than you had before, but you have the Republicans that are there on Capitol Hill are stronger than ever before on the Second Amendment. So in some ways, we're better in Washington on the Second Amendment, even though we lost the House, than before the midterms. Because again, you saw that Jeff Flake back and forth on Brett, right? You saw that, you lived it. I don't think that happens again with this Senate. Second of all, there's a lot of tradition and pageantry that goes along with the U.S. Supreme Court. It's sort of a glorified political body in some ways, because they're usually asked to decide questions where there's no clear answer on. And if there were a clear answer on these cases, every case would be 9-0, right? But there's 5-4, 6-3, because these are questions where you can debate it out. That's why they get to the court. So the reason why I bring up the tradition and pageantry of the U.S. Supreme Court is, you know, if you talk among court observers, the view is there's two justices that are most likely to be the ones that step down or whatever. One is Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the left because of health reasons, and the other is Clarence Thomas, who's now 70 years old because, of course, he's 70 and he recognizes that, you know, Donald Trump could lose in 2020, and maybe he should step down at the end of the term and let a younger Clarence Thomas replace Clarence Thomas. So I bring this up because Clarence Thomas replaced Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African-American justice. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg were to resign, there would probably be a lot of pressure politically to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with another woman. Again, you don't have to do it. It's about tradition and what's happened in the past. And I think that the one woman who was on the short list is Amy Coney Barrett, who was she was a professor, I think, at Notre Dame. She's now a federal judge. She's the one, when she was going through the confirmation process, I believe it was Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, basically asked her, can she set her Catholicism and her Catholic views on the side in deciding cases, which, of course, was a question I thought we had resolved as Americans with the election of John F. Kennedy, but apparently not in California. So I think if you wanted to go to Vegas and bet, Amy Coney Barrett out of the Seventh Circuit in Notre Dame would probably, you know, she was on the short list before. She has like 8 children, I believe, a couple of whom are adopted. She's very articulate. She was a Supreme Court clerk, very credentialed. So if you wanted to bet someone, she would be a person you would bet on. But again, you know, at the end of the day, it's up to the president.
Just to follow up, if it happens in 2020, the election year, does Trump have to sit back because it's a presidential election year?
Yeah, I don't think that will happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen because I think you have a Republican Senate. You have the McConnell rule over, well, let's wait for the midterm election is when you had sort of splits where you have the president is of one party, the Senate's of another party. And that's kind of what happened where the Republicans were in the Senate and Obama was the White House. And that's why Merrick Garland didn't get his thing. The other thing is, of course, you know, Harry Reid just a couple years earlier had packed the D.C. circuit, right? Because Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster for Senate, for judicial confirmations. I think there was a little bit of payback going on there to the Democrats. But no, if we have a chance to replace a Supreme Court justice in 2020, that will happen.
In the back.
This is not directed at anybody in particular. It's more of an NRA question. Back in the fall, my wife and I had to drive down to Georgia. So I'm scurrying around trying to figure out where my permit will keep me out of jail. And of course, living in Vermont, I have an out-of-state permit, which is a non-resident permit. And what was shocking to me is that of the states I had to travel through to get down there, I only had to lock it up in a trunk in a couple states. But half of the states that recognized the permit from the state that I have it from only recognize the resident permit. Now my question is the NRA doing anything to try to convince these states that if I hold a permit from a state that you recognize their permit, what the hell difference does it make whether it's a resident permit or a non-resident permit? I still had to go through the same stuff as the resident did to get the permit. And why is it not honored like it would be if I lived in the state that issued me the permit?
I live in New Jersey. I feel your pain, brother. I'm largely in that, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I studied the maps for personal reasons. I mean, I've had to apply for a non-resident permit from out of state because New Jersey doesn't give them out. I also travel cross country, so I know exactly what you're talking about. The problem with those reciprocity agreements is they're negotiated between the states. I mean, we do get involved in those discussions. There's some states do it attorney general to attorney general. Some of them can do it through legislation, but then of course when the legislation is on there, there's an interpretation of it. It becomes incredibly complicated. There's also a lot of movement on these, but I mean I can give you a whole host of examples where we've been involved. For example, Minnesota. For years and years, Minnesota only recognized maybe 6 other states, and they don't recognize a whole lot more, but it's increased substantially. Now, the reason for, I think this is a part of your question, is you're saying, why are they doing that? They've issued you a permit. There's a couple of reasons, and I was actually working on this issue in Colorado when it first came up, where Colorado said, we'll observe out-of-state permits, but the driver's license has to match the concealed carry permit. So the reason that they do that, and again, it's a lot of anti-gun rhetoric. I obviously fully support your position and would love it if it was that way. And in fact, we in the National Reciprocity Act in Congress also address that issue, so that if national reciprocity would ever pass, they would have to recognize the permits you're talking about, the non-resident permits. So yes, we're involved in that where we can be, but it's a tough fight because a lot of the reciprocity problems come from the anti-gun states. If you look at Florida and Utah, they recognize 30 plus states. North Dakota is very high. Well, the states that aren't recognized are the New Jerseys, the Californias, the Marylands, and you're never going to be able to negotiate a reciprocity agreement with those states.
This being said, the national reciprocity, if it actually ever comes through. I talked to a few people in Vermont. I don't do it much anymore because they look at me like I got 3 heads. To mention in the state of Vermont that you think the state of Vermont ought to issue a carry permit. They can, just like New Hampshire is constitutional carry, but they still issue a permit for those who want it. What happens to those of us who live in a constitutional carry state when national reciprocity comes through? We got squat if our state's not issuing us a permit.
Absolutely. I mean, you've highlighted one of the problems in Vermont, unfortunately, is unique in that regard, because all the other states that are constitutional carry states, they started differently. They had a permitting system, and then they moved to constitutional carry. You guys never had one here. So I don't know what the answer to that question is, but it's clearly going to be a problem for Vermont. It looks like Evan knows what the answer is.
When they first started coming up with the national reciprocity, Chris Cox said that, and the way that the NRA would want to accomplish it is that a state like Vermont that doesn't have a carry permit, the residents there could get a non-resident carry permit in another state and satisfy that standard. If you implement a carry permit process in this state, it will be mandatory right quick. So be very careful where you tread. I'm up in that state house all the time. You will find something you don't like if you pursue what you're talking about.
But I will add it's not an issue that we ignore or that we're half working. We're full in on that. And that was in the National Reciprocity Act for that very reason, for folks that are in, and this is what's ultimately going to help out Vermont, but the real reason that we're full in on that is for the people in California and Maryland and New Jersey, New York, and the jurisdictions that don't issue permits. Because me in New Jersey, I will never get, and my wife is a judge. I can't even get a permit. That just highlights how crazy it is there, and I can't get a permit. So NRA recognizes that, and the way around that is to do the non-resident permits. And it's not the best outcome, but there's a few of us in some bad states, but it's a way around it, and we recognize it.
Question over here.
Yes, hello, my name's Mark Truian. I'm from North Clarendon, which is about 5 miles away. I want to thank the other Marks in the room. We seem to have a plethora of them. But it had been mentioned earlier about the carry, and this brought it up when I was thinking about it, most of the carry permits are gonna be handled through the state legislature. And that brings me up, I suspect, but that brings me up to how do you contact your state legislators when they don't pay attention to you? How do you make your points known? The thing that got me started is when Terry Williams emailed me a copy of H211, prohibit the use of air rifles for taking game. This is essentially legislation for BB guns, okay? You know, Daisy's been around since 1886, keeping your kids off the lawn for almost 200 years. The thing that gets me, this is so stupid, and I have found myself, I have to admit, I'm coming up from Brattleboro, which is sort of like a, Burlington of the southeast Vermont. But I am so outraged that the people in Montpelier, and I guess this is going to wind up in your lap pretty soon, Mr. Hughes, they don't pay attention to what you have to say unless you blow sunshine up their pant legs. Okay? Basically, what I'd like to do is say that the direction that you're going in is going to be, it's not the right direction. If you're wasting time on this, there's a hell of a lot more serious concerns for the people of the state of Vermont than to have the overpaid legislators legislating the use of BB guns. Granted, I pointed this out to Mr. Williams, back in 1806, Lewis and Clark took a 46 caliber BB gun with them out west. Essentially, it had a large capacity magazine of 20 lead balls. In the current lexicon of assault rifles, Lewis and Clark took an assault rifle with them. And also, before I ask, I want to thank Mark, the attorney, Mark Esquire. You mentioned the fact that we are the first responders, and it harkens back to the old, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away.
That's right.
So how do I get because the legislators down in Windham County don't pay attention to you if you mention anything that has to do with pro-gun. They'll say, thank you for your input, you'll never hear from them again. Fortunately, we live in Rutland County, and we have more people of an understanding nature here. But for the most part, the people in Montpelier simply do not pay attention to anybody in this room. Thank you.
Can I address
Go
that?
ahead.
I've been dealing with the people in the State House for over 20 years. And if there's anything they can do, it's count. They count votes, they count telephone calls, emails, postcards. And if you get 5 to 10 people contacting them, they pay attention. Now, there's one thing you need to know. When you talk to a legislator, they'll listen to you, and the first thing they'll go check is, did you vote? It's very easy to check in the state of Vermont whether you voted or not. And if you didn't vote, then they don't have to listen to you, and they know it. What we need to do is get our friends, beyond those of us in this room, out there voting. And you would be appalled if you check the voter list in your town to see who didn't vote in November. You will be taken aback by the people that you think voted that did not vote. And it's we have to impress upon us and our friends and our family that our folks need to start voting. Because when I hear people say, well, this turned out that way and that turned out this way, and I'm unhappy with that. Did you vote? Well, no, it doesn't do any good. Well, how's not voting working out for you? When you're sitting around the beauty shop, the laundromat, the barber shop, wherever, moaning and groaning, when people who are in Afghanistan and other places around the world are putting themselves in harm's way to protect us and our freedoms, and we can't do the same thing to cover their back, what does that say about us? And you get exactly the freedom that you earn.
He just said a mouthful. Terry Williams came up short in his primary by 5 votes, right, Terry? I wish you'd made it. Al?
Yes. Al Wilkinson from Rutland, Vermont. I'd like to thank the panel and the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen Club for all that they're doing. But those clubs begin with individual clubs. I happen to be the president of the Proctor Fishing Game Club, which is within about 5 miles of here. We have realized for the last couple of years that things are going to get tougher and tougher. And the more people that we have that belong to local clubs and support their local clubs that allow us to support the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen and the NRA, the better off we're going to be. In light of that, we have increased our membership, which has always been small. 4 years ago, it was 135. This year, we upped it to 180. We have applications here that I'm going to leave with Dolores at the front desk. We are a non-discriminatory club. We don't care who you are. If you can pass the standard background check and you're willing to pay the money, and we do give a discount for NRA members, that we would love to have you fill out an application and mail it to our post office box. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Oprendick from Brandon. I have a question for Evan. During the debate about S55, I listened to it for 2 or 3 days last year while it was going on in the House. And about every other speaker was either the representative from South Burlington or the representative from Brattleboro quoting federal statistics on crimes. I'm wondering why nobody on the Republican side didn't hold up the statistics from Vermont and quote those back and ask her why she wanted to change the laws. Thank you.
All right. One of the things that we do, Federation, is our president, Chris Bradley, owns a computer software company. And he takes the ATF and FBI statistics and puts them into charts, particularly pie charts. And he just updated our website, www.vtfsc.org or .com yesterday. And if you put your pointer on Legislature, you can go down and see those graphics. And they're on a slideshow. All you got to do is just watch and they go by. And I'll give you a few examples. In 2017, the FBI statistics for the United States showed that the lowest state for violent crime in the United States was Maine, with 121 violent crimes per 100,000 people. The second lowest state was Vermont, with 165.8 violent crimes per 100,000 people. And the third lowest state was New Hampshire, with 198.7 violent crimes per 100,000 people. This isn't the NRA statistics, it's not the federations, this is the FBI's. Now, they published in late 2018 the 2017 statistics. Later on in 2019, they'll publish the 2018 statistics. This is consistent. This goes on year after year. And your 5 or 6 lowest violent crime rates are Vermont, New Hampshire, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. It's these states with the least restrictive gun laws. Gun laws don't make you safe. Good citizenship makes you safe. And holding people who commit violent crimes accountable is what makes our citizens safe. And until we start getting our government officials to understand this, if they keep going the way they are with S55, we will slide into the higher violent crime rate states because we're punishing the people who behave themselves and are good citizens and are capable of defending themselves and sliding towards what we see in the 3 southern New England states, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, where they have higher violent crime rates. You've got 6 New England states. There's a very clear distinction between the violent crime rates in those states. Those charts that Chris uses shows we're the second lowest state, and these are per 100,000 citizens, in murders and almost every category of violent crime. You go onto that website and look at those graphs, and it's inarguable. These are FBI statistics and BATFE statistics. We are not a major source of guns to other states, and we are not a violent crime state.
Can I say that? Mind if I say something? I'm going to tie a couple your question together with the gentleman over here that asked a good question about why your legislators don't listen. I never even thought about it this way, but somebody, I was at an event in New York, and this guy brought this up and actually did a presentation on it, and I think he made a good point. You know, S55, we had to swallow that. We lost on that, not because we lost a debate at the State House. Had nothing to do with stats. We win the debate every time. I mean, the facts, the common sense, it's all on our side. You know why we lost S55? It's because they turn out more people at the polls than we do, and they win their seats. And that's why they don't listen to us, right? So if you ask me, would I rather have a nice chart with statistics and win a debate in Montpelier, or would I have 3,500 of my buddies show up on election day and kick them out? That's how you win their debate. You kick them out. The debate's over. It's not about pie charts or crime statistics. That's all in our favor. But you got to kick them out. That's it.
Question over here?
Yeah, I'm Willie. I live in Rutland. Guys covered a lot about the national stuff. But our biggest danger here is not so much the national stuff, it's the statewide stuff. Okay, we got the Chittenden six-pack, your Martin Lalondes, your Philip Ruths. You have a governor who basically, in my opinion, turned out to be an anti-gun Trojan horse, and so on and so forth. This past election, unfortunately, they took the House, the Senate, and the governorship. So basically, they have a veto-proof majority. And so now we have this, and they're salivating, piling on all these laws. So, in response to Act 94, the Federation, you got, your lawsuit going on, got the gun owners of Vermont with their lawsuit covering the rest of it. But we can't keep, depending on the courts, it takes a lot of resources, financial resources. You guys know that. There's a lot going on here. We can't keep doing that. If they pass more laws, which they will, because they have veto-proof majority now, is the NRA going to keep, suing? Is the Federation going to keep suing? Can we afford to do that?
Evan?
Whether or not we have, Article 16 or not. I don't know how many of you know about Article 16 of the Vermont Constitution, which is the Second Amendment cranked up to 11, which more plain language. But most people in the state don't know about it. But anyway.
We're going to keep suing. But
all the laws? Because there's a lot of.
If I can finish. But we don't want to be in a situation where we have to sue. We want to be in a situation where these laws aren't being enacted. And the only way that's going to change is, I was up there Tuesday. I'm up there quite frequently. That legislature does not reflect the composition of the population of the state of Vermont. But it does reflect the composition of the population that votes.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of guys who moan, groan, and complain who don't vote. And this is going to get nothing but worse. And it's not just on guns. It's on a lot of other issues that if we're going to retain the state that we are used to enjoying in Vermont, we have got to get our folks off the sideline and voting. There's no excuses. If you're not on the ball field, then you're not in the game. And you are going to lose. And we have candidates that are getting elected from our opposition who run unopposed. We have got to get candidates to run. We've got to get them in a viable campaign, and we've got to get our folks voting. I worked at the Rutland Fair with Terry after the primary, and we worked a booth together for the Federation. And people came up to Terry and asked him, well, how'd you do in the election? Terry says, I lost by 5 votes. And they says, geez, maybe I should have voted. Well, if you cared enough, if you were interested enough how we did in the election, why would you not vote? And some of them said, well, I don't vote in primaries. Well, there's a very good possibility of getting the best candidate for office elected in the primary to be on the November ballot. And you talked about Article 16. Article 16 is the Vermont version of the Second Amendment, and it's much clearer. And we're in the city of Rutland. In 1902, a guy named Andrew Rosenthal was arrested for carrying a concealed firearm without a permit. And he was found guilty, and he appealed. And in the May 1903 session of the Vermont Supreme Court, the Vermont Supreme Court held that the Rutland Ordinance, for which Andrew Rosenthal was convicted of violating, repugnant to the Constitution and laws of Vermont, throwing out the conviction, which is why Vermont never had those carry permits, because the Supreme Court so succinctly came down with their opinion as to the fact that there is an unquestionable right to keep and bear arms in the state of Vermont, that they wouldn't tolerate that Rutland Ordinance. And there's probably a darn good reason why Rosenthal couldn't get that carry permit from the chief or the mayor, and it's probably because of what his last name was. There was a lot of immigration into this country around that time in our history, and those folks did not bear well. The history of gun control is a history of discrimination. And if we want citizens to remain free and safe, we have to stand up for what we own and what we believe in.
Well, you guys want any last words?
I got
Got a question?
one quick question.
Go.
So, I'm John, I'm Black Gun Street Supplies, street here, not Main Street. You're at the Perry Gun Show with me, you saw how many people came through the door, 72-hour waiting period, it's gonna kill that show, and I sold 115 guns in 2 days. What are we gonna do about it?
I'm gonna let Evan take this, but I can tell you what we should do. First of all, every gun shop owner in the state should get together and be contacting their legislators. I mean, we're gonna do our job, but I mean, listen, all these questions really boil down to the same thing, and it's, I mean, first and foremost with the voting. You know, I mean, we've got so many of these districts, and I have this problem in 2 states, Rhode Island and Vermont. These people are running unopposed, right? And now we're reaping what we sowed or didn't sow in terms of voting. And that's got to change first and foremost. But up there, they're not even, I had a discussion with several legislators this week about that very subject. And they have the whole subject is on suicide right now. That's all. And I said to them, I said, do you guys understand? I mean, aside from the suicide debate, that this is about economic development and the jobs and the industries and the shops that are going to be put out of business. And so, you know, we're making those arguments up there, but people got a call. I mean, and I'll give you one last anecdote. I mean, this week they were consumed on the abortion debate up there, and there was a new legislator that I was talking to, and just out of curiosity, I said to her, have you been getting a lot of calls on this? She said, you know, I've gotten a few. I've gotten like 10. And I said, you know, I always ask questions because some of this stuff ends up pertaining to us. And I said, well, how many were for and against? And I knew what her position was. She was pro-life. And she said that she got 1 pro-life call and 9, she was pro-choice. She got 1 pro-choice call supporting, and 9 of the calls were on the other side. She's going with the 1. Yeah. She's going to go against the 9. Well, how many? And the only reason I bring this up is because you know that happens on the gun issue when you call, you know, the guys over in Chittenden County, right? And they're outnumbered. But they can ignore 9, but they can't ignore 90. You know, and that's why you got to vote and you got to call. But in terms of the gun shops and the stores and the gun show operators, you guys, we need to get everybody together, and we need to make a strong economic impact, because that if they start hearing from businesses in their district, that's hitting them twice. It's hitting them votes and it's hitting them in the pocketbook.
Well, that's what I was talking to a couple of the bigger dealers up there. We were talking Sunday morning about it. And you think about it, there's a gun show in this room next weekend. And it's probably going to bring in another 1,200 people.
pizza shop across the street, all these other businesses, you know, they thrive on that weekend because there's so many extra people around.
And I'll tell you right now, none of the legislators are even talking about gun shows, gun stores.
They don't understand that
Yeah,
the
no.
72-hour or 48-hour bill, if it does pass, will essentially kill a huge fundraiser for the Berry Club, a huge fundraiser for the Lemoyle Valley Club, and it'll hurt the businesses that are around where those shows are held.
You were at the Berry Fish and Game Club gun show. Berry Fish and Game Club, and I'm a trustee of the club, draws a substantial portion of its funding from that gun show. That's how the club has the range, the clubhouse, which Vermont Fish and Wildlife uses for a lot of its training courses. It's how they do the fishing derby. It's how they do their hunter ed course. And what people may not notice is over the weekend of the Berry Fish and Game gun show, there's a tremendous influx of people into downtown Berry, to the restaurants, to the motels, to all businesses downtown that will lose that once the FFLs decide, why should I rent a table at a gun show when I can't sell the gun there? Why will people come to the gun show when they can't buy a gun there? And these clubs, Lemoyle Valley is the same way, provide a tremendous service to their communities and safety. And especially if you go to the Lemoyle Valley Fish and Game Club show, all of the law enforcement agencies in that area do their practice, training, and qualifying on the ranges of the Lemoyle Valley Fish and Game Club. We also have, for our clubs, do banquets, and they raffle off guns there. And if they can't have the gun go out the door that night, many people aren't going to be that interested in either buying a raffle ticket or participating in an auction. Why is all this? Because one 23-year-old decided to take his own life with a firearm. 626,000 residents have to change the way they live their lives because of the decision of one person in 1 year. And they're just using this as the vehicle to try and pass this legislation through on gun sales. And this is not going to stop this year. It's going to go on next year, just like it leaped forward from last year to this year.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Jim Martin. I'm the president of the Deerfield Valley Sportsmen's Club down in southern Vermont. Our club actually is made up of about 64% of out-of-state residents because we're so close to New York and Massachusetts. Answer to the fellow's question, I called my legislator about an issue too. She told me the bill I was talking about had to do with the change in age. She said, that bill doesn't affect you. You're an old man anyways. Then she hung up. I kind of think maybe I'm all right, but it seems to me that we're a fragmented group. A few here, a few here, a few here, a few here. If we could pick out the biggest, baddest SOB in Montpelier, and all the clubs come together to support the defeat of that individual, that might be something that works. You know, if a club in Wyndham County sent a few $100 to somebody in Rutland just to get rid of the SOB that was there, it would seem to me that that's the kind of thing we need to start to do. To show Montpelier, no matter how fragmented they think we are, when it comes to getting rid of somebody, we know how to do it.
What we need to do is stand together. That's the anglers, the hunters, all of us. The gun owners. Well, if we stand together, we're formidable. And if you want an example of that, how many of you heard about the Salisbury Fish Hatchery? Right? Well, they changed their attitude right quick about closing that fish hatchery when they started getting a lot of people pushing against it. And one of the advocates for closing that fish hatchery was Amy Sheldon, the chair of the House Natural Resources, Fish, and Wildlife Committee. And guess which town that fish hatchery's in? It's in her area. And she was all in favor of closing it until, what's the one thing they can do? Count. Until they started getting feedback that people were strongly resisting that closing that hatchery. The hunters have to understand when they go after a magazine limitation, they're coming after them too. And years ago, they had an anti-trapping bill up in the State House, and they had a hearing up there. I don't know if any of you were there, but I was. And we were all lined up to the House floor in the State House. And then they said, we're going to turn around, we're going over to the Pavilion building. And I said, damn, I'm at the front of this line. I'm going to be at the back of that one. We had so many people there, and there were only about 400 licensed trappers in the state of Vermont. There's a hell of a lot more than 400 people in that room, because our attitude was, if you pick a fight with my brother, you got to fight with me. And if we stand together like that, the guys who fish, the guys who hunt, the guys who shoot, we are a formidable force. And do not allow yourselves to be picked off one at a time. Just like predators run one out of the herd, the weak one, and take it down one at a time. Stand together. Solidarity is our greatest strength.
One comment, there are now sheriffs in certain towns across the country who are refusing to support gun laws. Just like the people with illegal immigration are creating sanctuary cities. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, what do you think? Was this a good event? If you've got, and I know we got people from all over the state of Vermont here, if you've got, your county wants one of these forums, get in touch with me or Dolores, and we'll see what we can do about putting it on. But I want to thank you personally for coming, and thank the panel, and we'll turn this back over to Dolores.
I want to say I am thrilled with the turnout tonight. It's a Vermont winter night. The roads down our way were very miserable. And Mr. Mason, who is on the road crew in Paulet, made sure, because I saw trucks go by, that I got to the radio station this morning. And I think the thing that makes us Vermonters, makes us Americans, is maybe that we know to stand our ground. And it is time to stand our ground. Thank you. And everyone here in the panel and everyone in the audience, I want to thank you and also say we are ending this to give you time for one-on-one. So take the opportunity to shake the hands of these people and let them know that we're behind them. It'll only take a second. If you've got a question, give them a question. And at the end of this, I am proud to be an American. I am proud to be a Vermonter. And I can tell you now, I will stand my ground. Thank you.